Yeah, so I've known Mike Gospe for many years. And while I can just kind of give an intro, nail it down, memorized, I thought I would just kind of, I jotted some notes to kind of get more specifically of the value he brings. But first and foremost, I want to kind of explain about customer advisory boards and what he's responsible for, and actually do some show and tell. Because I actually, if you guys can see the camera, I own this book, Customer Advisory Boards, and then the second companion for how to actually moderate a world-class meeting through cabs. But I probably should explain what cabs are first, before jumping into that. So basically, Mike's been doing over 30 years of active listening. And as you know, with product managers, we need to actively listen. One of these are all referred to collectively as listening posts. And one of the most powerful type of listening posts is a customer advisory board, or CAB for short. It's probably the most executive level and strategic focus group of them all, actually. So referred to as the CAB guy, Mike has built broad expertise in helping innovative B2B companies to design and execute these powerful programs. He's facilitated over 150 CAB meetings worldwide. And we know what's going on today, but prior to 2020, cabs were always physical in person, and he just turned it upside down and reinvented the process to be completely virtual moving forward. So he wrote the first cab operations manual, which I just showed. They're actually a two-piece collection. And as a companion piece to these books, earlier this year, he actually did a Udemy courseware. And the title you can find out is called Mastering Customer and Partner Interviews, which this all about art of listening in the interview that help you in your cabs. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mike Gospe of the Kickstart Alliance.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alok, and welcome to everybody. I'm so glad to have you join us. So we are going to be talking, my title, as you know, is Whoever Understands the Customer Best, Connecting Listening Posts to Customer Advocacy. But before I get into that, I have a few questions I'd like to ask you to kind of get a sense of what your interest is and where you're coming from. And Tom, so I've got three questions. And Tom, would you mind sharing the first poll question? Tom, are you there?
So, yes, I am. I think I have launched the poll. Yes, so the poll should be up.
I don't see it.
Let's see here, relaunch poll. Let's try that. Clear existing, yes, relaunch. Okay. So sometimes it's clever and hides it behind other windows, which is especially helpful.
So it's up. So this is just a quick question about kind of the job role, where you're from, and you can scroll. There are a few more options. If you're an engineer, because we couldn't catch everything, just actually put it in the chat window. I'll monitor the chat. So those of you who are not in a marketing capacity, just say engineer or others, and I'll pick that up. So take a few minutes just to reply to that, if you would. Tell me about your role.
All right, usually we give folks the better part of about a minute here. We've got 60–70% of the folks. Wait till we get to about 80% here before closing it off. Going once. Going twice, a couple more came in. All right, feel like the auctioneer here. We've got about just shy of about 80% of the folks have responded, and I think we'll close the poll so we can move on here. Sharing the results with everyone so you can see who's on the line.
Okay, all right, good. So we've got product marketer, executive leadership team, buddy from press and analyst, outside agency. And then, okay, then I'm seeing online, we've got some consultants, VPs of engineering. Okay, all right, excellent, very good. Tom, let's go with the second question. Now this one is, what do you think is the #1 challenge to understanding your customers? And so I provided a number of spot answers that I typically run into when I work with companies. And I'm wondering if any of these echo with what your experience is. Tell me about your #1 challenge or what you think your number one challenge is for your company to understand your customers, and take a minute to read through and answer the option that best fits what you think is your number one challenge.
And in the other, again, we have an other category as a catch-all. So if you've got something really top of mind that's not on the list, feel free to throw that into the chat window. We can find out what was missed that was not on the list.
VOC, by the way, is voice of the customer, if I've thrown anybody off. Lack of quality time. Mara, that's a good answer. Yeah, that's for sure.
I like Manesh's answer.
I think Jim has his hand raised. Jim,
I
you have a
do.
question on that? Go ahead.
Well, I just going to point out the survey designs. Just a little feedback on the survey design. Number one challenge, multiple choice, pick all that apply, is kind of a contradiction there.
Yeah, I know. I just
Okay.
wanted to see what kind of was resigning, and this has not got no scientific evidence whatsoever. It's just for me to kind of
All
level
right.
test where people are coming from, what's top of mind. So, Tom, do we have?
Yeah, we're just a couple more jumped in here. Let's see if it's settled down. We have about 3/4 of the folks in. So close that off and share the results back, and you can see
Oh, very
there's
good.
a lot of popularity of a lot of these.
Okay, no, this is actually not surprising at all, and for sure, there's definitely some overlap. We'll be talking to some of these as the role of internal politics, balancing short-term goals, etc. But okay, this is all right. This is very good. And the third question, Tom, if you would put that up. So is what voice of the customer tools or techniques? I think of these as tools, and I'm not asking about specific software or anything, but I'm wondering if you've used any of these common elements, and you've participated in user groups, focus groups, customer advisory boards, industry conferences. How many of you have actually used these elements specifically as a tool to not only connect with your customers, but to try to listen to them? And I'm wondering if any of these, form a sweet spot.
And this is unfortunately set up, though it says pick all that apply for only a single choice.
Okay.
Oh, that
Then,
may be a misconfiguration on my part.
Pick your favorite then.
Needed to beta test that a little bit better.
That's
So-
okay. We knew we were taking a risk with this, just trying to get some interaction. So I apologize if it's a little clunky.
Product quality testing.
I ran a poll at a meetup last night. Mine didn't go well either.
I know these are
Totally a poll rookie.
these are challenging. Okay, Christina writes, reach out to clients and ask them to try it and give feedback. Ivy talks about one-on-one interviews. Yeah.
We're sitting here, I think we probably got
Yeah.
all the responses we're going to get here. So let me share.
Yeah.
this
Let's take a look.
plus the chat window.
All right. Okay. Advisory boards are well represented. Of course, user groups and focus groups. I expected that. Partner advisory board. Good. Excellent. Customer surveys, some net promoter score. Okay. All right. Excellent. Good. Thank you very much. That helps kind of gives me a little bit of a context. So what I've done is I've put together a few slides, but I really want this to be more of a conversation than a lecture. But so I've got a couple of things that I'm going to do to kind of level set, and I'll pause and I'll invite for some questions and discussions. So so my day job is being a customer advisory board strategist. I'm a professional facilitator, specifically chartered or skilled in doing customer advisory boards, which is a very unique flavor of these kind of connections. I ran my first advisory board in 2002. Of course, they were all in person right up till March of 2020, and then they all went virtual. And I was just reflecting on, I think I've facilitated over the last 18 months, 32 virtual customer advisory board meetings. And I can tell you what you already know. The world has dramatically changed. And in the cab, this is especially clear that not only has it changed as we all feel it on a personal level, but it has rippled through business in obvious ways. Everybody's working from home, and not so obvious ways. Buying processes are different. There are different people involved in decision-making. Almost everything that we took for granted in producing a product, in conducting operations, and managing your sales model has changed. And the advisory board has brought to life and really give color and texture to what changes these are. So from my seat as the facilitator of these, I find this incredibly fascinating and insightful. And I'll give you the short answer for all of this is that if you didn't believe so before, we are all connected. All of us in what we do professionally in our industry, all of us because we're consumers, there is this huge connection that is clear in these meetings. And this is something that I find so personally fascinating. And so maybe we'll get to some other insights along that. So I want to talk about listening posts. And here's kind of the way I think about this. If you think each of these signposts are an opportunity for a listening post from a customer advisory board to user groups, different listening posts are valuable for listening to different types of things. They are not all the same. And I'm not going to go through this in detail, but let me just kind of highlight a couple of things. When you're taking a customer advisory board, as Alok mentioned, you're talking about the strategy, not so much of your company, we want to get to that, but the strategy of how your customer's business is changing, how their value proposition is changing, therefore what your value proposition as your vendor needs to change so you can align future directions. That's a very unique conversation. It's a very unique listening post. On the other end, you've got social media, and that's all about what others are saying about you right now. And that's a different type of conversation. If you're going to an industry conference, you might go to listen to what hot topics people are talking about, what industry trends are, what are the various insights. And so this is the key takeaway from this slide is that look at if your company has at least 3 of these signposts, and I'll bet they have more than these, you have a lot of listening posts in action in any given time. So my question is, well, has the company made any effort to connect those dots together and take a step back and say, well, wait a minute, what are all these conversations telling us? Right now, when you look at it as a voice of the customer model in an ad hoc way, it's like you're all feeling a different piece of the elephant and you don't know really what it's all telling you. And so the hardest thing for any executive team to figure out is how to listen. And that's kind of the key takeaways for what we're talking about here tonight. Hence, all companies need a strategy for gathering and applying customer directional guidance. Now, a lot of times, certainly in my past experience, the strategy was kind of left up for grabs. The different listening posts were managed by different people in different teams across the company. They never shared information back to one another, and that opportunity for learning and connecting the dots just didn't really exist. That's a problem area, especially now. As I mentioned earlier, the entire world changed in March when we went into lockdown. I'll tell you right now, the entire world is changing again as we're moving to whatever this next phase, hopefully out of the pandemic is, but who knows, right? There are different things at play, and we need to be listening. So there needs to be some sort of strategy. So hopefully in today's presentation, I'm going to give you some clues, and I'm going to lead into a simple exercise you might want to think about with people that you work with in your company to try to get your handle around this. So let's simplify. I tend to be a simple guy. I can only think of three things at any given time. So I tend to think of listening posts as tools or venues for capturing three types of feedback, three types of directional guidance. Strategic direction, as I mentioned earlier, is where should our company be going? Do we have the right value proposition? What business problems are we trying to help our customers solve? That's one type of category of listening posts. Product and use cases are, as you might expect, do we have the right feature set? How should we prioritize those features? What are the right use cases for our product and service? And then, of course, customer satisfaction. How did we do today? What do customers think? So this is how I'm kind of simplifying the world, certainly for our conversations today. But if you, and in your role as a product manager, a product marketer, an executive, can help your leadership team or your colleagues think about listening posts in a little broader perspective, and what are we hearing, and what does this really mean? You will find value you did not know before. So this is a lead into four big ideas that I want to cover with us today. One is, well, how do we build a voice of the customer model? What are some initial steps we could take? And the third is, second item is the right tool for the right job. There is a lot of confusion that a product focus group is the same thing as a customer advisory board. It's not. Learning how to interview customers. If there is one skill that I certainly wish I had early in my career as a product manager and then a product marketer before I went into executive leadership, and now ultimately running my own team since 2002, I wish I had more of a skill in knowing how to conduct customer and partner interviews that were actually helpful. This is not a skill most people know how to do well. A lot of people say, I got no problem. I can sit and have a conversation. A sidebar with a customer at a cocktail event does not count. And we'll talk about that. And then I want to conclude with a small little bit of advice on how you think of a product management job versus a product management career. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about voice of the customer objectives. And I'm going to lead into a model, then I'm going to open it up for some discussion here. So when I first start talking about voice of the customer models with any companies and executive teams, there is an immediate bifurcation of how people think. One is, it's all about customer satisfaction. It's about the net NPS score, net promoter score, or net promoter system, if you want, and gathering some real-time feedback on how are we doing on customer satisfaction. And yes, that is important, and we need to be listening to that. But there's this other dimension of, well, is our product right? And are we actually doing the right thing to be relevant for tomorrow and the day after tomorrow? That's really where the game is. So listening to customers is twofold, and it's tricky to do because we have to be answering and addressing needs our customers have today. But if you want to be in business the day after tomorrow, we also need to be listening towards the future. And this is because when I say the title of whoever understands the customer best wins, this is definitely true because consumer needs can change at any given time, and they frequently do, and they're changing right now. And so how do we wrestle or at least rationalize the need to improve customer satisfaction, and how do we stay relevant, and how do we understand the connections and how they're different? And this is tricky. This is a hard thing for a company to kind of wrestle with. But these are the things when I'm talking with a company and I'm engaging in coaching companies, we're trying to separate out what questions we're trying to answer and where they fit. This leads into a model that I want to offer you. The voice of the customer model, and I tried to think simple in terms of this pyramid model. Let me describe how this works. On the y-axis, we have the type of topics or the type of questions you might want to answer, and it ranged from a tactical topic like Ron, I had a bad experience with your product on Tuesday. What are you doing to fix it? That's a tactical topic, very important tactical conversation. A strategic topic is, you know what, I want to talk to the Chief Information Security Officer on how their business is changing as we're coming out of pandemic. How are their security priorities changing? Where are they investing? And how are they investing when they probably have gaps in their staffing model? So how do you wrestle with that? That's a strategic question. So I mentioned earlier about kind of the right tool for the right job. So now let's look at the pyramid. The pyramid of customer input is specifically drawn to be broad at the bottom to imply that there are many people in your company talking to many customers at any given time. And at this bottom level, which is the focus of real time, this is where your salespeople play. This is where your customer support people play. Social media comes into it, customer feedback, NPS, customer stats. So you probably have a lot of people in your company touching aspects of your customers at even any given day. And so your universe of touch points is purposely broad. We go up to the next level that I call product direction. I'm defining this as short to midterm from a roadmap perspective. This means that you're considering your roadmap from the next 6 to 18 months out. The product is baked. You want to do some fine tuning of the user interface, maybe the profile of it, but the product is largely the product. How can you maximize the usability and the satisfaction on what you have today? And that's a very important, but a shorter or a midterm focus up to 18 months. And this is where traditional product focus groups, user groups, sidebars, maybe some online forums are very popular tools for that middle layer. At the top, the strategic direction, you're maybe only interacting with 12 of your best customers, right? It's fewer. The top of the pyramid indicates fewer. Your roadmap perspective is maybe 18 to 36 months out. You're looking 3 years because you want to be able to skate to where the puck is going to be, using my hockey analogy. Not where you are, but where you need to go. And the advisory boards is a perfect place to have that conversation. So this is an attempt to try to think about all those listening posts that I talked about earlier, where they fit into this particular model. And then we'll talk about, well, how do you bring some of those things to life? But let me pause here and get some thoughts, some questions. Maybe some of you are using a similar model with this. Who maybe has some experience with voice of the customer and have seen something similar? Does anybody have anything you might want to share with our group? Mila, how about you? Have you worked with any kind of customer voice of the customer type things in your role? Sorry, you have to unmute yourself.
Not the right person for you to call on.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, maybe
listen to everybody else.
I'll speak up.
Go ahead, Teresa.
Mike. So yes, I've had experience in this range, and I think this is a great framework to offer. And I do find that, and I hope you'll talk about this, the profile of person that should be on customer advisory boards, because I would think, and this speaks to a comment Jim put into the chat, but it takes a certain kind of executive who can help you with that strategic direction. So I'm sure you'll be talking about that.
Yeah, that's very true. And in fact, we're going to get to that. So I want you to hold that thought. This is really important. But one, and I don't want to unfairly pick on somebody else, but I suspect some of you also have some other related experience. How many of you have actually participated in a focus group at some point in your career for your company? Anybody? Tom, what was your experience?
We were building a global product, and it was fascinating. I feel like focus groups were kind of fell out of favor for at least a decade as people started doing A/B testing like mad off of the back end of web-based products, but building a physical product that had a global footprint. We actually did the traditional focus group where people sat in a room with a one-way mirror, and we got to it's like watching the FBI witness interrogation. But we had an average of, I think, around 8 folks came in, various different backgrounds and cultures, more evident in some parts of the country than others. And the psychometrician that was running the group was really good at saying, okay, so there's somebody here's an admin, somebody's a senior executive. If I call on the senior executive first, he's going to state their opinion and everybody will line up. So I'm going to call on the lowest ranked person in the room, at least by perception, and work my way up. If somebody was being quiet or really more of an introvert, he tried to draw them out and keep the conversation very balanced with directed questions. So he had a very specific strategy and technique for making sure he maximized all of the extraction of the opinions. But we also got drastically different results in Asia versus Europe versus North America. It was fascinating.
Yeah. So, boy, you've mentioned a lot. We could have a whole other discussion on that, but you're right. Region plays a difference. I think somebody else was giving me a thumbs up. Ron, was that you giving a thumbs up? What do you?
When I was at Apple, mid '90s, we were exploring additional user experience. I was managing the development team developing the Mac Finder, the UX of the Macintosh. And we were exploring new UX kinds of things. We hired a company to do our focus groups, and then we traipsed around the country. We believed that we could not hold a focus group in the Bay Area, that it was tainted, speaking of geographies. So we held them. I think I went to New York and saw one there, possibly Chicago and possibly Seattle. Don't quite remember all the places we did it, but it was fascinating and really useful.
Yeah. So, boy, you're mentioning some really good things, because not only do we need to be strategic in the type of listening posts you set up, you need to be strategic on who you invite to participate in. And you're right, there are bubbles of opinion that are going to warp your, the product focus group in the Bay Area with the Apple, halo effect is going to maybe skew some things. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but it does mean you need to be aware of it so you can mitigate some of these variations that you might think skew the data. I'm just looking quickly at some of these comments that people have posted. Are customer advisory boards used for consumer products? No, they're not, at least not the ones that I do. The ones that I do are all business to business. It's not to say that you couldn't, but they would be a totally different flavor and animal, because when you're selling to a business to business, you're impacting part of the channel. And if you're going straight to the end user consumer, the consumer industry and the Procter and Gamble folks have got that kind of science element down to a science, which is not what I'm covering here. So if you're Dave, if you are in the consumer product space, I'm sure there are lessons or insights that I can offer you today, but the consumer angle is a very different animal that you would want to explore, which I'm not an expert in per se. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I thought I'd make just share a bit of my experience. In my previous company, I sat in on at least 2 or 3 customer advisory boards, and it seemed like the sampling of the customers, the way that the customers are selected, has a big effect, obviously. And what I tend to found was that the customers that were there were happy with our products, and they did come from different parts of the world, but they were sort of our lead key customers. And so they always had good things to say, or they wouldn't say anything. And so I always found that I don't think the advisory board meetings went quite as we were expecting them to. We didn't get the level of information that we wanted. And oftentimes it was afterwards in the hallway conversations when you got some.
So that, Joe, that's a really good point. And my focus for today was not specifically on advisory boards, but let me offer you that. So I've been doing this for a long time, 20 years. And I've got so many bruises to my kidneys because of kicks on things that we've learned. And what you've mentioned, I learned early on. So when I do an advisory board, it is never about the product. not directly. It's about the customer's business and what the future is on where they're taking their business. Now, we're looking for implications and relevance that's going to impact our product roadmap. But if we can make the conversation about how the industry is changing, how their company is changing, what does this mean for how a company responds and interacts, so you can become a more valuable vendor for that, then whether a customer is happy today or not happy today kind of doesn't matter, because we're talking about the future. And in fact, I like there's a coaching process I go through with my clients, and to help them pick the right customers to participate in the board. And it all ties down to what's your objective? What do you want to learn? And what are you prepared to do with the information that you collect? And those two questions are very hard for many executives to wrestle with. Once you figure that out, then the question is, well, who should we invite who could answer that, who could provide that direct guidance? Where companies get into trouble is they worry about throwing a party and having nobody show up. So they say, well, who are the friendly customers that we could invite? And then you have a meeting where the worst thing happens is after the meeting, the exec says, well, that was interesting. I didn't learn anything I didn't already know. Complete waste of time. So anyway, enough of that segue. Let me get back to our previously scheduled program. If I come back to my slide deck here. So I want to move to the next level. These are great questions, and thank you guys. I want to have more sharing as we come up. So when you're thinking about this enterprise model, kind of a question is, well, who leads this gnarly nut within a company? And the answer is it kind of depends. But here's one way that I break it down, because it does come back to what do you want to learn and what are you prepared to do with the information that you collect? Now, the different listening posts are going to be of different interest to different department owners. So for example, the customer support people, they care about Net Promoter Score. They're watching social media carefully. Product management cares about the roadmap. The corporate or business unit marketing probably cares more about future directions. So those people are going to have more of a stake in the type of listening post and what the voice of the model looks like. From a customer subset perspective, right? Not all customers are treated equally, right? And I'm sure if I were to ask you, how many of you have participated in a company where they spent an inordinate amount of time servicing a customer for very little payback on it, right? And we want to kind of avoid that. So you've got the universe of all customers, as I mentioned in the other slide, that there's real-time feedback. But as you climb up the stack, I always tell the companies I work with to be incredibly selfish about who you want to get this feedback from. So in product direction, it would be not unusual for there to be separate sidebar breakouts of customers that attend user groups to have a very focused, maybe roadmap conversation. There might be a different type of conversation that happens with your reference customers. Now, yes, they are happy with you, but there's a way to harness them to get more insight and feedback than you know. I'll give you one example in just a minute. And then the strategic questions, as I talked about earlier, is kind of where the business is going. So two quick examples of this. So once upon a time, I spent many years working at Hewlett Packard, and we did this program, which I absolutely loved. It was called the Day in the Life program. And we worked with an outside facilitator, and I was on the product team, and there were a few other executives. We would actually go fly out to one of these big enterprise companies, and we'd spend the whole day and we'd follow them. We'd talk with them on their team about, what are you trying to do? What are your goals? What are your objectives? What's hard? What's easy? And then we actually followed them. So we got to see, what's the first thing you do when you come into the office? And we had very specific questions that we were asking that would lead to implications, not only in our brand, but how our operations worked. And we did that for, I think, maybe a dozen customers, and got really, really deep insight and learning, which had an impact when we got back to the company that impacted everything from sales, marketing to operations, and even accounting, and how we build customers. So that we used reference customers because they were most friendly and most likely to say, yes, I will not only give you some time, but I'll invite you in. And that program was awesome. it's a challenging program to implement, but boy, the payback was huge. From the strategic customers, not many, there are a couple of companies that I'm working with now who are smaller. Now they've grown rapidly. They're fortunate over the last couple of years, where their original business was selling to small to medium-sized companies to sell a few licenses. These tend to be SaaS-based customers. They're selling software on a SaaS model. But they want to win the big enterprise accounts. And so we started to interview their customers. We had, as part of a topic of a customer advisory board, we said, where are your business going? What are the problems? Okay, great. What does this company need to do to be more successful to help me with this? And the words they came back with was fascinating. They said, you know what? We love you guys, but you're not enterprise ready. We said, oh, hold on. What does that mean? When you say enterprise ready, what do you mean? And so they gave us very specific examples of how the CEO and the executive team were interacting in a way that was essentially hero worship. I got a problem. Oh, great. Let's fly the chief technology in to solve the problem, which is great, but that doesn't scale. And that scares customers who need companies to run an operation at an enterprise level. So here's an example of a couple of specific listening posts used to really, these are big ticket initiative, guys, let's get everybody on deck to learn from and take value. And when that happens, something magical happens in the company. People get energized. And I'm talking about cross-functional teams from product management, product marketing, corporate marketing, sales, operations, kind of come together to say, oh, I didn't know that about our customers. This needs to change how we operate. So this is a model that says, even those of us on the call, we're talking about listening posts and voice of the customer. You can't own it by yourself. What I want to do is empower you to be a cheerleader, to be a stakeholder, to bring this concept to your peers, your colleagues, your management, to say, you know what, maybe we should become a little bit more formalized in how we do this. So here's I promised you a short little exercise. I've used this before. This works really well, and I want it to be simple, but I want it. You'll be surprised at the conversations this inspires. So here's how this works. So you're getting a version of the pyramid model, and what I invite companies to do is do their own internal assessment. So you'd work with a small cross-functional team in your company to say, well, what questions are we asking? What listening posts are we using, and who are we asking? So somebody asked earlier about, well, who's the makeup of the customer advisory board, and how do you pick who goes to a focus group? So these are really great questions, because I'll tell you the number one problem when it comes to customer advisory board specifically, when a company has run an advisory board in the past, before I even get introduced to them, and they tell me it failed, and I'll ask them, well, why did it fail? Tell me why. One of the usual items that comes up, and we hinted to this earlier, is they ask the right question to the wrong people. And therefore, the information is confusing and downright meaningless. So I like this approach, because if you gather people around and say, you know what, when you have an opportunity to interact with a customer, regardless, just what questions are you asking? And then after that is, okay, how did you gather that information? Did you use a product focus group, a user group? Oh, and who did you ask? So when you do this exercise, you're going to develop a spreadsheet, and it's going to have lots of questions and lots of people inside. I'm going to boil it down for you. You might get something at the end of the day that looks something like this. What questions are we asking? Oh, it's like, we tend to ask, what problems are you trying to solve? How can we help you? Oh, great. Those are CAB related questions. Using the CAB, maybe you're using a quarterly business review, QBR. Well, we ask it in account reviews. Oh, we're asking CXOs or VPs. In the product direction, we tend to be asking questions about what's their use case? Tell me about your use case. What features matter most to you and why? Those questions are great for the product, and you're using a product and a user group or maybe a conference. You tend to ask first-line managers and users for those questions. How satisfied are you with our product or service? you're probably asking the people most familiar with your product, which probably tend to be users. So this is a super simplified, generic example. But when you go through this exercise, what I anticipate you're actually going to find is you have huge gaps in this. You may find that you've got a ton of interaction here around use cases, product feature sets, prioritizing different elements, and you're doing nothing at strategic direction. You may find that you're kind of whimsical when collecting because you don't have an MPS program set up. And maybe you're asking hodgepodge, are you satisfied or not? You may find gaps. And the best place to start with the model is identifying what the gaps are and how to fill in the gaps, either with information you already know, because other people in your company know it, but you don't know that they know it. Hence, remember the feeling the elephant. Or if they are indeed gaps, you can begin a plan, a voice of the customer initiative to help fill these gaps. Now, I've just unloaded a ton on you. Let's talk about it. Thoughts, questions? Let's see, Tom, you asked a question, or
I had a
let's
whole
see.
slew of things. One, when you were saying, make sure you have the right person in the audience, was reminding me, quite a few folks in the audience may have seen this episode, but there was an episode of The Simpsons where they select Homer Simpson as the everyman and interview him in excruciating detail of what he wants in a car. And he goes off into left field and wants, separate compartment for the passengers that so they don't bother the driver. And they build this thing that costs like, $10 million. And the only person satisfied is Homer Simpson. Right. And of course, like the car company goes bankrupt is the more. So a few thoughts on how do you vet out to make sure you haven't hired Homer Simpson to design your next car?
Okay, so this speaks to the importance of having quantitative data as well as qualitative. So the listening post, what I've been sharing with so far, is highly qualitative, and there is value to that in how you make your business case to get money and attention from your executives. But you need to also have some quantitative input. So whether that comes from reviewing your CRM system and getting some good data on, well, who are our customers today? And why do they buy? Why do we think that they buy from us? Or hiring a market research company to actually look more broadly and give you lots of quantitative data. You actually need both because, and I will tell you, it is very dangerous to base any single decision based just on one customer meeting. Please don't ever do that. Or even what your customer advisory board says, right? Because they say it one time doesn't mean you should go off and do it. And in fact, a prerequisite when we schedule or set up a charter for a customer advisory board, one of the expectations is that we want this open, candid feedback, but the company, the host company, is under no obligation to do anything with the feedback other than to listen. And the customer needs to understand that just because you want the user interface in blue doesn't mean you're going to get it in blue. Right? It's a source of input. And all the cab really cares about is when you meet with them 6 months later, you tell them what decisions you made and how that information helped you. But Tom, to your point, you need other quantitative elements to help. Now that can be a challenge because the world is changing so quickly. We may not even, right? You can't always ask, what does the future look like? You have to use your own intuition and gut on this, but use every tool at your disposal, leverage the hell out of your CRM system. And if you don't trust your CRM system, you've got another problem. You've got a sales operation problem that needs to be addressed so valuable input can be put into it that can help the company make more strategic decisions. Companies have a lot of problems with that. But there is never the amount of perfect data to make a decision. You can't wait for perfect. So you use the tools you have at your disposal, get some level of quantitative feedback. So an example might be, let's survey your entire customer base on a broad set of questions that could help you triangulate, either use cases or value that hits in that product direction. And then use as anecdotal evidence what the CAB talks about to bring the quantitative data to life, that can be a powerful 1-2 punch. So, Dave is asking, what do you mean by account reviews or quarterly business reviews? Oh, great question. So, remember when I talked about this company I was working with was getting this feedback that you're not enterprise ready. That's where this falls into it. And so, with your most strategic customers, having an opportunity quarterly to have your CEO and other members of your executive team and whoever owns the account to meet with the senior decision makers at Walmart to talk about where they're going and say, hey, guys, this is where we understand your business are going. Here's what we did for you the last 6 months. Yeah, this was great. We see opportunities to grow for you, Walmart, to grow your business in the future. Let's talk about it. That's called a quarterly business review. Now, there's various flavors that you can do. You might think of it as a very special strategic sales meeting, but it's definitely got high caliber executives at play. And if you want to win, so there's one company I'm working with who I will spare their name, actually has Walmart as a customer, and they listed them as a customer because they are selling Walmart a whopping $17.5 thousand worth of revenue. And my response to them was, you don't even deserve to put them on your customer list. A company like Walmart for 17.5, that's outrageous. You should be more strategic to them. They don't understand your value. So you can use a QBR, quarterly business review, to do that. Now, in a sales operations capacity, I would go so far as to say, now I'm not a sales guy, but every salesperson probably has 50 top accounts. And for those top accounts, they may cater to hundreds of accounts, but they probably have 50 top accounts. They should be doing an account review once a year. How are they doing? Where can you grow your business? In fact, they probably are, and you just don't know about it. So that's a problem. One of the biggest tools that I loved in my prior career was we would set up marketing and sales summits that would happen every 6 months. So we had the sales leadership team, we had the marketing leadership team, and the product team would come together every 6 months to talk about what deals did we just win? What are the trends that we're hearing about how and why people are buying the product? What problems are they trying to use? And then marketing would say, hey, here's where we think the business is going based on these trends. And we would triangulate and have that conversation so we could come out of it with renewed energy on being focused on how we're going to cooperatively take marketing and sales and product in the same direction. So hopefully that helps. Dave, did that help with your question? Hopefully it does. I can't see you nodding your head.
You had another great question as well, asking kind of how does a company making consumer products determine their strategic direction if you've only got kind of consumers to reference?
Well, I think that's a great question. And again, I'm not really the expert to answer that, but similar things would apply. They would do their equivalents to kind of product focus groups. They probably have some industry groups that they pull together. They're carefully watching trends and drivers. I mean, I'm trying to think how Procter & Gamble figures out what Tide is going to look like. And that's a great conversation to have. And I don't want to say anything that's going to be, wrong. There are better people more skilled than I who can talk about the business to consumer angle on that. All right. I want to pivot a little bit because I promised that talking about how you interview customers is, and I will go off in the deep end, say should be one of your super skills, one of your superpowers. So I want to talk about this for a second. All right. So when you're talking to customers, and again, I mean this in kind of a B2B concept, but I think you could also apply the same logic to interviewing consumers. So, here's my guy in the picture saying, and if you want to give customers what they want, you need to know how to ask them. Now, a lot of product marketers, product managers, I know actually are somewhat hesitant to talk to customers. And from my own experience, when I worked at HP, now this was in the late 80s and early 90s, for some bizarre reason, product marketers didn't want to go talk to customers. What if a customer tells me something I don't want to hear or I don't know what to do with? And my response was, well, that's exactly why you should go listen to them. But there was some hesitancy, some pushback on that. And I think it also plays to, it's risky to ask questions and to think. Many people have this notion that you should already know what the answer is to the questions you want to ask. And that's false, especially with things being so changing so much. So I work and coach with executives. Certainly when you're talking to the executives, there's a certain, you want to find out what you want to ask, but then there's a right way to ask the question. You would never ask them, do you think we should partner with Google to do something? Customers don't know how to answer that. They don't care. They don't know your business as well as you do. But there's a different way to ask that question. There's a question about how the executive's business is evolving and whether they're going to be facing problems that are going to require A, B, and C. In the back of my mind, I'm knowing, well, if they say yes to that, then I know I should partner with Google. So there's a roundabout way to get to it. So interviewing, and my partner and I, earlier this year, created a course on Udemy that goes into great detail about how you master customer and partner interviews. But here's kind of the boil down to this. Be prepared before the call. What do you want to learn? And what are you prepared to do with the information you collect? I keep answering these questions. And this mainly because so many executives struggle with, it's like, yeah, I'll figure it out when I get there. It's like, no, time out, guys. What do you want to learn? And if you're not prepared to do something with that information, then don't waste the time to ask them. So that takes some soul searching. You don't do it by yourself. You do it with a cross-functional team. So you can make each interview, I don't care if you're interviewing a user, a first-line manager, or a CIO, you got to go through the same kind of objective. When you're actually interviewing, I like to suggest you pretend you're an investigative journalist. So I'll give you an example. One of the questions a company wanted us to ask their customers, are you happy with the product or the portfolio of services? And I was coaching members of their staff to become better interviewers. And so we'd go through a coaching, so we developed the interview guide together. And then I coached them, we did some role playing, and then they conducted the interviews, and then we recorded it. And then I listened to it afterwards to give some feedback to it. And so when this question came up, hey, are you happy with our services? One of the answers was, yeah, pretty much. And then the interview goes right to the next question. I'm going, wait a minute, time out. I want to know why. I don't care if they're happy or if they're not happy. I want to know why. And so there's this, as an investigative journalist, yeah, tell me more. I sense you're dissatisfied with something. What's going on? Or if you're happy, why? Tell me more. Well, I think your product is aligned with where we're going to want to go. Really? Why? How did you reach that conclusion? Well, we're talking with you, right? You're peeling the onion to really understand. And this is not a show of weakness because you don't know the answer. It's the sign of being curious and showing empathy for the companies that you're selling to. One of the differentiators every company has, every vendor has with their customers is how empathetic they are. Remember, whoever understands the customer best wins. This is where becoming an investigative journalist. Practice active listening. So active listening is a very key way to kind of reflect back on what you just heard. So, Jim, I heard you say you were pretty happy. You think that we were aligned because of XYZ. Did I get that right? Did I understand that right? Oh yeah, Mike, that was perfect. Good. Or no, Mike, you misunderstood. What I really wanted to get on was this. That helps you be in the moment of the interview. Another item is writing notes for others, not yourself. So note taking in the interviews is really important. So when I was coaching people, I would say, show me your notes afterwards. And it's hieroglyphics, it's chicken scratch. Okay, that's fine for you, but you need to turn it into a report, right? Back to our listening post model. You gathering the input is great, but that is not sufficient. You want the rest of the team to find value of what your interview was. So you need to write the report. This is one thing we covered in the class, but you write it so somebody who was not on the call could read it and go, oh, I feel like I was on the call with you. I understand the top takeaways, what the key points were, and very quickly I can read the summary and see what came out of it. And the last item is you need to follow a repeatable process. I've had some product teams who said, yeah, Mike, I'll talk to a few people when I'm at the conference. We'll have a little sidebar. And sorry, that just doesn't count. You making up questions on the fly doesn't speak to the first bullet. They're not prepared. You can't repeat that process. So if you want to have value of the few interviews you conduct, whether you're doing 2 or 3 or several dozen, you need to have a process that's repeatable, not only for yourself, but for the rest of your team. So again, let me pause here because I'm shooting the fire hose at you. Who has experience actually participating in customer interviews of any flavor? Does anybody have some experience you'd like to share and how close it comes to or how far away it was from the tips that I just shared?
I see David asked, what's your opinion on asking customers if they can record the interview?
Yeah, good question. So this is a tricky one, Dave. If you're interviewing at the lower of the pyramid, it is quite fine to say, hey, do you mind if I record this call? Now, what you want to watch out for, remember anytime AT&T calls you or you call AT&T and say, the line is, we're recording for quality purposes. That kind of sends the wrong message. But if on a personal level, you're talking to them and say, hey, you know what? I really value your opinion for my note taking. Do you mind if I record this? And you're at the real-time feedback for the product direction. I see zero problem with that. Now, it gets really tricky when you're at the customer advisory board level. And as a rule of thumb, I don't record those because when you're talking about the future and you've got senior execs in the room, I don't want to inhibit anybody from saying something they would share otherwise if they knew it wasn't being recorded. So I don't record them. We capture notes on this, but for the interviews that we're talking about here, I see no problem with that. Jim writes, stay away from do, can, are, instead ask why, what, how. Exactly right. You're asking open-ended question and the questions are about them, not about you. You get more information if you show empathy and compassion for what your company, what your customer is trying to do. Because you know what? When most vendors call their customers, they're just trying to sell stuff. And everybody knows that. And that's a great off-putting mechanism. This is why customers are hesitant to take interviews with any vendor. So when you position this, you say, hey, I want to hear about your experience, where you're going, what's important to you. I'm not here to sell you anything, but I really want to know what you think about where you're going and how we can help you. So other comments. Teresa, you said the magic word, Mike. For any answer that's interesting, tell me more. Do you have experience using that trick?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I find that, and I think a lot of people have this experience that at first people are a little reluctant to open up. They don't know what it's okay to say and what it's not okay to say. And using some of the tips other people have written in and what you've said, the more open you stay and the more they see you're welcoming of absolutely anything they tell you, the good, the bad, or the ugly, then they start to open up more. So sticking with them and keeping that total openness, just like a therapist, really, makes them start to feel safer about sharing what's on their minds and the trends they see, especially when they're projecting trends, because that's risky because they could be wrong or somebody might disagree with them. And so, you want safety is so critical for having them feel open.
It is. And I'll tell you a little secret about what was always true in CABs, and it's definitely true now. CAB meetings do resemble more of a therapy session than, so one of my clients sells high technology to hotels, hospitality. I cannot tell you an industry that has faced more pain than anything in the last 18 months. But by opening up this discussion about, tell me how your world has changed. What does this mean? Where do you go? I mean, it was incredibly heartfelt. And when people felt in a safe environment to share what was going on, we got all kinds of insights for possibilities we hadn't thought about. So, and
empathy.
Well, it is all empathy. Yeah. And I don't say that to shortchange I don't mean to imply lack of value, and please don't take that direction. It's huge value, but we're talking about the psychology of people, of humans, and listening posts is a psychological thing. I don't care what technology you have. It all plays the same, because at the end of the day, people are going to buy on emotion, not logic, even though they go through 6 months of various, detailed, at the end, it's always emotional. Christina, you said New Coke, it's back. And I'm not sure what you meant by that. Could you share where that comment came from?
I just meant it literally. I think the recipe for Coke was just redesigned, but they don't actually call it New Coke. But it's different now. Supposedly. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, nothing insightful.
Well, I didn't know that. But I mean, I always believe, so whether you're a product manager, product marketer, in engineering, be empathetic, be curious. It is more important for you to have the questions than to know what the answers are. Always be learning. Tom, you said that as one of your opening charter or rules of engagement. You always want to be learning. And this is very true, which leads to the last slide that I want to share. This is words of wisdom. If you will grant me the opportunity to share this, I want to talk about the difference between and since we largely have a product management community here, I'll gear this to you, but it could be any discipline. There's a difference between approaching your job as a job versus as a career. So if you are a product manager, you are given a specific baby, a product, a specific something that you are chartered to take care of. And it is very easy to put the blinders on and just kind of go through the mechanics and do your job very well. But along that kind of one-dimensional, how does this cog fit in this wheel? And there's value to that, but that won't help you become a leader. And if you're looking at your career growth, either within your industry, outside of the industry, or a second later in life, you will be served more better if you're willing, at least occasionally, to take the blinders off and to think, what's the bigger picture that your cog plays into? So this is all about not asking, do you think our user interface should be red or blue? But occasionally ask the question of, guys, let's remind ourselves, what is the problem we think the customer is trying to solve? What's actually happening in the industry that is driving the way people behave around those products? So if you can bring some of those questions to the table and do it in a diplomatic, constructive, pragmatic kind of way, you're going to be viewed, and I speak to this from personal experience, you will be viewed more valuable within your company. It's like, oh, you know what? Mike asked some really good questions. We should ask him to be part of this. And this is a key step on your journey to becoming more of a customer advocate. The products companies buy today are going to be, they're going obsolete really quick. And the products that are going to be popular 5 years from now haven't been invented. So for you to protect yourself in your career as a product marketer, product manager, whatever, you have to be mindful to at least have part of 1 year open to how the world is changing and how customers perceive the problem that they're trying to solve and how you might be able to solve them. So being curious, investing in yourself to become a little bit more comfortable in conducting customer or partner interviews. Now, when you're interviewing partners, I love interviewing partners because partners offer a whole channel to conversations they're having with customers that you never see. So by asking a partner questions like, how are your customers talking to you differently now than they were before the pandemic? which is a question we asked not long ago, was, oh my God, like night and day differences. So I would challenge you, no matter where you are in your career, to think, what's the next level of curiosity in a positive, constructive way could you bring to the organization? And sometimes early in my career, all I would do is I would, one of the techniques, simple techniques, we'd have kind of an open, it's not really a lunch and learn, but we had like when we were all meeting in person, it's like, for lunch, why don't you guys come in and we're going to talk about X, Y, Z. Let's kind of compare notes. Jim, John, and Jane, you recently visited customers last quarter. What did you learn from that? Let's talk, let's share that. And I became kind of the instigator of a new type of information sharing, which then kind of got caught on. And then I was invited to other kind of meetings and we could ask other kind of questions. That's where your job becomes more interesting. At least it did for me. So that, my friends, is, I'm going to get off of my soapbox. This is me again, the two books Alok shared earlier. I wrote the 2-volume manual. It's on Amazon. It costs a few bucks if you're interested in such a thing. Is my company ready for an advisory board? How do you execute a world-class meeting? I've also created a CAB website. I should have put the website on here. It's called cabstrategy.com. Website dedicated to all kinds of best practices, whether you're doing cabs in person. Of course, they've all been virtual for the last 2 years. I've got that methodology down. I invite you to check that out. And if interviewing is a skill you might want to kick around, I think Udemy's got the course for, I don't know, $10, $9.99 or something. And I've got the short URL there if you're interested. So I'll leave this screen on for a little bit. Hopefully this was helpful. So I'm going to ask the dangerous question. Was this conversation of interest and value? That's
a yes, no question. Can you rephrase that?
Hi, well, okay. What did you think? How was this helpful, if at all? I don't know, Jim, you blabbed first. What do you think?
Yeah, it was interesting to go through this stuff. I mean, it brought back some memories of things done well and things done not so well. I totally agree with the importance of doing qualitative and quantitative, launched into a big combination of that. And you learn different things from the different ones. Sometimes you'll get a stray data point in the qualitative, but you'll also get some little nuggets that are not just straight data points, but are insights that nobody else is talking about. The problem with the quals is you're writing the questions. And so there's not much of an essay section for people to tell you what's really going on. And you're only sampling what you're thinking to ask questions about. So totally important to combine both.
It definitely is. And part of the questions when I work with executive teams on what do you want to learn, one of the things we start with is I ask a leadership team, what is the business hypothesis you think your customers have and how you're helping them? Because we want to validate whether that's right or not. And oftentimes it's not what they think it is. So that opens up kind of a key dialogue. So you're right. How about some other people? I'm seeing some interesting.
Nicole had a great question earlier. She was asking about, if you're doing an in-person interview, what's the right ratio, or how many is too much when you have your sales rep along and then you have a couple of developers and suddenly you've got this army of folks descending on like 3 poor customers at once. So how do you manage that dynamic and figure out what's the right ratio ahead of time?
Okay, so this is a great question. So this comes down to what's your objective of what you're trying to learn. Because when I talked about earlier, remember that day in that life portfolio program where we did have a variety of other people who attended with the meeting, but we would meet with not just one person at the customer. We might have a room where we had the CIO and his 3 lieutenants and maybe a user. And that's perfectly fine to have other members of your team participate. But for example, when I interview on behalf of my clients, CXOs for an upcoming CAB, the client, the vendor is not invited. So if you're doing the interviews, the last thing you want to do is have a cast of thousands sitting behind you, because that's incredibly intimidating for the person that you're interviewing. So I always like, if you can do a one-on-one, so there's certain types of interviews where a one-on-one is really what you want. There are other types of interviews where maybe you want a member from the executive team. If you're looking for technical knowledge, then you're coming from a technical angle and you might need to have one other person. But I always have a rule: please don't overwhelm the person that you're interviewing. So I would say be very careful. I'm not going to give you a rule because there's all kind of exceptions, but just be really careful. You may unintentionally inhibit the person from answering the questions you want. And if you make that too inhibiting, they're not going to want to come back to talk to you, and then you're in trouble. Nobody's doing in-person interviews right now, at least nobody in the world that I know. They're all happening virtually. And the typical interview, as a rule of thumb, we ask for 20 minutes. I've had six questions that we figured out ahead of time. We ask for 20 minutes because, and there's a logic behind this. When we asked for more than 20 minutes, it was easy for the client to say, yeah, I'm kind of busy. I've got back-to-back meetings. But if I say it's 20 minutes, it's easier for them to say yes to him. Once you get them talking, it is not uncommon for them to go 30, 45 minutes. You get more, but you could never ask for that up front because they would say, no, that's too much. I don't want to give that to you. So there are a couple of hints. There's more hints in the online course, and I don't have time to cover it here. Tom, I think that's why you put the companies in the one-way glass. So there's two types of focus groups. There's the blind focus groups, and then there's the non-blind focus groups. So once upon a time, I did participate in blind. They did not know who the vendor was until the end, and we were sitting behind the glass, and then we came out and did the big surprise. But there's other you can do where it's obvious that it's you. And again, it comes back to the objective. When you show that the reason you want to interview is not to sell stuff, of course it's to sell stuff, but that's not what you say. It's to align your company to help your customer solve business problems. You want to strategically become a more helpful resource for them. That's disarming for them. And people relax and say, oh, okay, you're willing to take the time to talk to me? Because most vendors don't do that. Most vendors come in and say, Tom, we're going to talk about me. I think I'm great. Here's everything I'm doing. By the way, my business grew. Let me ask you a question. What do you think of me? That's awful. You never want to do that. So let's see. Brad offers excellent organization in VOC, especially like the differentiation of strategic versus tactical. Thank you. Thank you, Brad. I know we're coming up we're about out of time, but does anybody have any other insights you'd like to share with the group based on what we've talked about today?
And the chat window is open for open-ended feedback, or you're welcome to unmute your mic if you have something interesting to.
Hey, hi, Mike. This is Abhijit.
Yes.
A very insightful session. Thank you so much. Glad to be part of this. On a similar lines as to what you described around the pyramid, we implemented something similar, not exactly in a very structured way that you mentioned, because we found few pain points in the way we are doing customer feedback and customer discoveries, right? So, and I just want to validate if that's the kind of a case which you also observed in your experience. What we observed is the pre-sales or the sales team, they generally work with the customers. The end goal is to sell something, and the discovery or the questions are asked as to what do you want, right? So that piece is covered in the sales and pre-sales discovery most often. When it gets handed over to the customer success management team or implementation team, the questions are asked around how do you use this? These are the features, these are the functionalities, this is a product. How do you use it? The piece that was missing and is the most important one, which we observed, is the why. Why do you want this? And you mentioned it rightly as well, and a couple of members also said that, wherein product managers and the product leads come into picture in somewhere in between sales calls and CSM calls. So there is another call that has been observed with the customers, wherein the why piece has been tackled. Do you see that in your experience as well, or?
I do. And this is exactly why I suggested you do this exercise, the pyramid model of what questions are being asked, who's asking, and Abhijit, you're adding another element of time. When are those questions being asked? Which is perfect. So you're right, many companies are comfortable, I'll say, interviewing at the bottom of the pyramid, either at the product or the customer sat. They're not so comfortable at the top, or they don't have anybody to lead that. So there's a big gap. And so all the feedback that you can collect is great, but it's time limited. It's based on what you have today, and you may miss what the next need is going to be. So it is a common problem. And I would suggest, follow that little exercise as an icebreaker, maybe for your team first, but then maybe invite some other people across the organization to kind of share, hey, what questions are we asking? What questions are we not asking that we would benefit if we could figure out how and when to ask them? That's the good first place to start. Ultimately, you're going to need to build a model that works specifically for your company. Every company has got unique nuances and cultural elements. So it needs to be homegrown, but you can use this exercise to open the door a little bit. And I would suggest that's a good place to start.
Well, absolutely makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Let's see, I will add my LinkedIn. I invite you all to connect on LinkedIn if you would like. I'll just put my LinkedIn here, and I hope this has been helpful. And Tom, I guess I will turn it over to you. I thank you very much for spending your evening with me. I really appreciate this, everybody.
Yeah, this has been really, really thought-provoking, and I definitely learned quite a number of things, and sparked all sorts of interesting thoughts. So I hope it did the same for everyone that attended. Just a couple of quick notes that if you joined late, or you've got a colleague, you say, I really wish my colleague so-and-so would have been here tonight. We will post the recording of this meeting, as well as we posted to the website as well as YouTube. So you're welcome to go back, or even a year from now, if you're wondering, I finally have gotten around to setting up a customer advisory board. I know there was this great thing I went to a year ago. I can't exactly remember all the brilliant things that were said. You can go back and look on the website and look us up in the archive and revisit things. So that should be helpful to folks. Mike's kindly offered to make the slides available. We'll post those also to the website. So keep an eye out. It usually takes a couple of weeks to catch up on things there. Again, I'll remind you, keep an eye on the website. We've got our director of programs wasn't online, but we do have additional speakers lined up for next month and the month after. So stay tuned, and we'll have details of that out soon. And we look forward to seeing you at the next month's meeting in roughly the same time. We're always the first Wednesday unless there's a holiday. And tell your friends, and we look forward to connecting. So thanks all for coming. Thanks again to Mike for such a fantastic presentation. This was really, really interesting. I'm definitely I have a number of follow-up items already for work tomorrow morning when I get in. So thanks everyone, and we will see you next month.
Thank you, everybody.